Welcome everyone to the Mentor Connect webinar, Preparing a Budget and Budget Justification for your NSF ATE proposals. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenters today. Elaine Kraft, PI, Mentor Connect Leadership Development and Outreach for ATE. Welcome, Elaine. Would you tell us a little bit about yourself and then please introduce officially for us your two co-presenters. Go ahead, Elaine.
All right, got a little trigger happy there with my forward button. Hi, I'm Elaine Kraft, Principal Investigator for the Mentor Connect project. It is my pleasure to introduce you to my co-presenter for today's webinar, Ellen Haas, and to our special guest, Elizabeth Tellis. Ellen and I will provide information about preparing budgets and budget justifications for NSF ATE proposals, and Liz will take the lead on answering your questions. More information about both of these co-presenters today are in the handout that you received along with your last reminder for this webinar. I encourage you to check out and see the other accomplishments of these wonderful people who are co-presenting with me today. I also want to thank our colleague Mike Glasecki and his capable team at Maytech Networks for facilitating this webinar. And of course, none of this would be possible without our funding source, the National Science Foundation Advanced Technological Education Program. We will begin today's webinar with an introduction to the Mentor Connect project, followed by an overview of an important activity in grant proposal development we call budgeting. Next, we will walk you through the actual NSF budget form you will be required to complete. We will cover all components of this form section by section. We will also discuss the required budget justification that must accompany the budget form. You will be given several opportunities throughout the webinar to ask questions. We will conclude by asking you to complete a very brief evaluation survey to help us improve our Mentor Connect Technical Assistance webinars. You may wonder why we are providing this type of technical assistance to potential NSF ATE grantees. The answer lies in the goals and objectives of the Mentor Connect project. The overarching goal of Mentor Connect is to broaden the impact of the NSF ATE program. One of the ways we are doing this is by engaging community colleges that have not yet benefited from NSF ATE funding. We are introducing diverse educators to NSF ATE, resources, and opportunities, and helping them learn how to prepare competitive proposals. Mentor Connect is using mentoring to develop new ATE grantees and leaders across the country to strengthen technician and related STEM education. What we want you to learn today is what you should put in the various blanks on the budget form, how to prepare a budget justification, why a good budget helps make a good proposal, how you can avoid common errors, and where you can find answers and help along the way to becoming an ATE grantee. The budget form that I have referred to is an online form in the NSF Fastlane system. You enter information into this form, which becomes part of your overall NSF grant proposal. You are strongly encouraged to use Fastlane for submitting grant proposals to the NSF. The Fastlane budget section of the proposal submission process is designed to generate a year-by-year and cumulative budget request for your proposal. As you proceed, it calculates totals for the separate budget categories and overall. Once each year's budget form is completed, the automated system generates a cumulative budget for the proposal. The budget justification, however, isn't a form. You will have to develop this document from scratch to explain the amounts entered into the budget form and how they relate to your project plan. The key thing to remember is that your budget should clearly fuel the project. There should be a very clear link between the money being requested and what you are requesting the money to accomplish. Time and time again today, I will mention the codependence of various parts of your grant proposal. Correlation and consistency is very important. Now, as we get started, let's find out how much experience you have had with NSF budgets. Mike, would you poll the audience for us?
Yes, just one second, and we're going to set up the poll before we ask people to answer. Okay, just one second. There we go. Now everyone, please turn up to the participants window right at the top, pull down and select A, B, or C. Have you had experience completing a budget? A, yes, I've completed it. B, sort of. And C, no, what is Fastlane? So I can see a number of people putting in. Please remember, don't use the chat window for this. Use the button, and that allows us to look at this. Come on, folks, it's an easy question. You've either done it or you haven't. A, B, or C. Good, we're almost ready. I'm going to show you the results here. And I'm going to give people now just another moment. I'll count down everyone. 3, 2, 1. Okay, the poll is closed. Let's take a look at the results. I'll just show them right here in the middle. Interesting split between A and C. Blaine, we've got a real mix of people that have done this and people that are brand new to the system.
Great, Mike. Thank you. We do have a couple of pointers here that will benefit those who have some NSF experience because there have been some changes recently. So some of you may need to know, how do you get to the budget form in Fastlane? As you can see on this slide, it takes several keystrokes. I will walk you through this process that goes from the NSF homepage, and I'm going to attempt to use my little pointer here. All right, that didn't work. Let me try one more time. Nope.
Yeah, just click on that second icon and then slide over. There you are.
All right,
we
here we
now.
go. All right.
Very good.
So here is the NSF homepage, www.nsf.gov. Then you click on Fastlane, which is in the upper right-hand corner of the toolbar. Then you go to Proposal Functions, and then you go to Login, and then Proposal Components and Forms, and then you finally get to the budget form. Now, this is the Fastlane step from the homepage that I just mentioned to you. Anyone can access Fastlane, but to begin working on a proposal, you must be registered with Fastlane. The institution that will be the fiscal agent for the grant and certain grant personnel must be registered. The institution must be registered first with an account administrator or administrators. Once at least one person at the institution has administrative rights, then it's possible to register individuals. Even if a person will be working on a grant, never has any reason to work in Fastlane, to be named as a principal investigator, co-principal investigator, or senior personnel on a grant, the person must be registered. Typically, a sponsored research officer or grant writer for the institution will register the institution, and then this administrator will register individuals for the grant being developed. All senior personnel must be registered. On this slide, you can see the Place in Fastlane landing page where these registration tasks are completed, right there. Now, back to the Fastlane landing page. To work on the budget or any other section of the proposal, look for Proposals, Awards, and Status. That's the section right here. Then select Proposal Preparation. And you see that it's under Proposal Functions. Next, you will need to log in. To do this, an assigned NSF ID number and a password are required. The registration process generates an ID number, and the user sets a password to allow access to the system. Once you get an ID number and have set a password, don't lose either piece of information. The registration process can't go forward if you don't have both your ID number and your password. I'm assuming you will all remember your last name. So I suggest that you give this information to somebody at your institution that you trust, in addition to keeping it yourself. Give it to your grant writer, a coworker, somebody working on the project. Just make sure that more than one person has this piece of information, because it is really causes some problems if you lose it and have to start all over again. Now, once you've logged in, you've got the budget access form here. Then you go down here to budgets. The next step is to select funds for year 1. You'll notice that this is also the screen where you will upload your budget justification, and we've put a little arrow here to show you that. You'll only do one budget justification for all the years of your project, not one for each year. There are options provided when working on this page that are helpful. For example, if your budget will be very similar for a subsequent year, you have an option to have the information from one year transferred to the budget form for the next year. If you do this, however, be careful about making any edits that are applicable to the next year's work, and keep things aligned with your budget justification. You will start by entering senior personnel, Section A of the budget. Now you see here Section A, senior personnel. You don't actually enter these names. Here are the names, but we didn't actually enter those names into the form. You actually select the names from a list who have been previously registered for your institution. This bears repeating. You may only select individuals who have been previously registered in Fastlane. This is one of the many good reasons for not doing this at the last minute. If you discover that someone you need to name in the budget hasn't been registered, it will take time to get this done, and you will need the person with administrative rights in Fastlane to register the individual. The same thing is true for subawards. A subaward organization must be registered in Fastlane, and all senior personnel on the subaward budget must be registered with that organization. These are definitely not last-minute tasks. I've faced a crisis or two over the years with this issue, and it's no fun. If you have multiple people you are considering for your budget, register all of them. When you prepare the budget, you only select the ones you ultimately plan to include. There is no reason to delay because you're not sure exactly who needs to be included in your budget. Please note the Calculate button option that appears at the end of each budget section. This helps you keep an eye on the calculated totals as you go along. Be aware, however, that calculating does not save your information should you exit the system. I will show you where you have to an option to save your work. This will just simply calculate this total like this number right here for that particular budget section A. Now, I've zoomed forward from Section A to Section L right here, all the way down to the bottom of the page. There is only one save command, and it is at the bottom of each of your budget forms. So after each section of information is entered, I recommend that you scroll to the bottom to Section L and save. If you do this, you can come back to the budget anytime, and previously entered information will be waiting for you. Forget, and you get to start all over again. Now, I will walk you through several additional sections of the budget. Here are just a few pointers as you go through the budget form preparation process. First, the form will be the same format for each year. Subtotals and totals are calculated automatically provided you select Calculate at the end of the page and save. The Fastlane system will take the totals in each category and prepare a budget summary page for you automatically. This is not something that you will need to do. Now, on this slide, you can actually see the budget form. This is what it's going to look like right over here. It says Summary Proposal Budget. On the left, the NSF budget categories are listed. This list is important. We strongly recommend that you use these categories in the order that they are presented as an organizing tool for your budget justification. A little later, we'll show you some examples about how to do this. But doing your justification by these same alphabet letter categories that are in the budget itself, A, B, C, D, so forth, really does help you keep things straight and helps reviewers and program officers alike. Please note, however, that these NSF categories are likely to be different than for budgets you may work with at your college. It is important to understand how NSF interprets each of these categories so that you can plan and submit your budget accordingly. Once funded, you will need to work with your business office to develop a clear crosswalk between the NSF budget categories and the budget codes that will be used by your college. Now let's look at these budget categories. As you can see, there are two personnel sections. Section A is senior personnel and Section B, other personnel. There's a separate Section C for including fringe benefits that are associated with personnel costs at your institution. The senior personnel category typically includes the principal investigator, co-principal investigator, and others in leadership or other significant roles who will receive financial support from the project and whose credentials are part of the intellectual merit of the project. In other words, reviewers will look at these individuals to determine if they appear to have the expertise and experience to accomplish the work of the project. These individuals should be getting some financial support to conduct the work of the project and to help ensure its success. However, if you have a person serving in a senior personnel role who will not receive money from the grant, the individual should not be included in the budget. So you would not include anyone in your budget for whom the dollar amount would be zero. Every name in the budget should be associated with a dollar amount. Note, for those of you from our early poll who've had experience with NSF grants, you'll recognize this as a change. At one time, all senior personnel were named in the budget with a time allocation, even if there was no payment associated with that person's time on the project. This practice is no longer acceptable. It is important that the amount you budget for an individual align with institutional salaries or pay rates for that individual. An individual may not be paid more or less than the institutional rate for the individual. Do not budget or plan for an individual to receive from the institution more than 100% of a full-time salary for the person. This is an important point because it causes great grief among community college faculty, because it means that while working on a grant, no overload may be received for teaching an extra course or doing grant work. There are some very specific short-term exceptions to this NSF rule, but don't plan on being an exception when you develop your budget. If you have issues with this, you need to talk with an NSF program officer first. When you allocate funds to support personnel, you need to be reasonable and very specific both within the proposal and in the budget justification about the work the individual will be doing for that compensation. Not too much, not too little. You want them to be aligned. If you have somebody doing the bulk of the work of the project and you haven't put any money in for them, that's a little suspect. Likewise, you put a big salary in for somebody and it doesn't look like there's much work for them to do, that also raises questions. Because time and compensation calculations are an area where reviewers and program officers often find errors, I want to provide a couple of very specific examples to help you do this right. In this first example, we will assume that the principal investigator, here we go over here, faculty member number 1, the principal investigator, is a faculty member whose academic year contract is $54,000, right there. This faculty member plans to spend the equivalent of 1 day per 5-day week working on the project during fall and spring semesters, and he or she will work full-time on the grant for an equivalent of 2 months in the summer. So we've got 1 day a week during the academic year and 2 months during the summer. During the academic year, this work plan is 1/5 of the person's time. You will want to prorate the budget request accordingly. To do this, you need to know the salary per month and how many academic months equate to this plan. For the summertime, you just need to know what monthly salary rate to apply. The time calculation gives us 1.8 academic months right here for the faculty members' time in the fall and spring semesters. Then to this, we want to add the salary for summer work. The total time is reported split between academic and summer months. So we want our time here in academic months, separate time for summer months here. But there will be only one budget amount that you put, and it is the sum of the two. And you'll see I've written all this out down here for you. $10,800 for the academic month plus $12,000 for 2 full months in the summer is going to give you your full annual budget amount for this particular individual. Now let's look at a variation on this. We've got faculty member 2 that we're considering now. Basically the same information. Only difference is this time the faculty member is only going to spend half time during those 2 summer months working on the project. So we will be taking 50% of that 2 month salary, and the total funding request of course is less than the last one, but again we report this as academic months and summer months. Here is one more example. In this particular case, we are looking at an individual who is not a faculty member and who works on a 12-month contract at the college. The person's 12-month salary is $40,000 in this example, and you need to divide that to get a monthly amount. The person's time commitment to the project will be the equivalent of 1 day per 5-day week year-round, or 20%. So the first step is to get the equivalent number of calendar months. In this case, the 20% is going to give you 2.4 calendar months, and you'll see where we put this up here in the form, right there. Please note that you should never mix calendar months with the other categories when reporting a person's time. So somebody that's on a 12-month contract gets their time put in the calendar month. Faculty members are those that work on split contracts for the academic year and the summer year, or somebody that's just working in the summer or just working during the academic year. Their time is going to go in these 2 categories over here. So you can use these 2 over here together or independently, or you use this one, but don't ever combine the 2 over here with this one over here, the calendar one. Now, this picture shows what the actual budget form for senior personnel will look like after you enter your information. So you've got calendar months for one individual here. I've got academic months and summer months for another individual, and I've got only summer months for a third individual in this particular example. Okay. Now we're going to check to see if you're still awake. Mike, would you please give the audience a quiz?
Yes, I will, and thank you, Elaine. So here's the question, folks. How will you enter the NSF supported months in the budget? Now notice the question. You want to request 20% of a faculty for 1 course reduction for 2 semesters. This is a hard question. 20% of a faculty member's salary for 1 course reduction for 2 semesters. You have 5 choices. You can see them there, A, B, C, D, or E. So please take a moment, get out your pencils, and figure out which one you're doing. I've got to calculate this myself, Elaine. I'm just going to give you 20 seconds to do this. So go ahead and put your answers using the button to choose A, B, C, or D. Okay, folks, just another couple of seconds. If you're not sure, make a guess. I think everybody in the polls is heading a certain way. All right, folks, let's count down. Now remember, when you're putting in your answers, please don't use the chat window here. Go up and click on the polling button right near the top of the participants' words. You can see the little A, B, C, D, or E there. All right, folks, let's count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's look at the responses. Well, there's certainly a lot of interest here in number B. Liz, what's the NSF's position here? Let me position this right down the bottom there so we can take a look. Most people thought B here. Liz, what's the NSF perspective?
Well, I think they've been doing a good job listening to Elaine, who kind of used this same example. So B is most of the cases, that would be the right answer. You certainly would never have E, which would put it in both places. But it looks like more than half the people either weren't participating or just weren't sure of the answer. So let's talk about it a little bit. First of all, up there we didn't really tell you how long of their contract was. So the answer for B is if it was a 9-month contract, because 9 times 0.2 is 1.8 academic months. If it was a 10-month contract someone has plus 2 in the summer, then it would be 2 in the academic months. There are a few cases where C would be the right answer. So if there are faculty members, particularly technical faculty members, who really work a whole 12-month contract. So they actually are paid over a calendar month, and then let's assume that 2 semesters, maybe there's 2 semesters plus this third one. And so what you would do is that would be then 1.8 calendar months if the person is being paid on a 12-month contract rather than a split contract. Mike, if you go to the next slide, we can go over some of the big mistakes. This is probably the #1 mistake people make in filling this out. So some common mistakes people make is they use percent of times instead of months. So they figure, okay, I'm working 20%, I'll put in 0.2. But 0.2 would only be 0.2 of a month, so you have to convert it to months. Elaine did a good job, but they combined, they put calendar months and academic months, and you're one or the other. You're either on calendar months or you're on academic months. You're not on both. A lot of people say, well, I'm going to be working on the project all 9 months. Why don't I put 9 there? Because if you put 9 there, NSF would be expecting you to be working a full 9 months on nothing but that and having to account for that time. So again, you've got to convert that 0.2 to the months that NSF is supporting. It's a little tricky up there. It's not how much time you're working on, how many months you're working on it, but how many months you're asking NSF to support you on it. And then another one down there, the 5th one down there we didn't talk so much about, but there are other places further on down where they may not be a PI, but they're a senior personnel that you're paying, and you have to put how many months they're working on it too. And another mistake people make is a lot of times some of your co-PIs may not be at your college. So if they're not at your college, then you're going to have to put them down somewhere else, usually as consultants, okay? Although there are a few cases where the college is actually hiring them to come work part-time of it, but usually it's going to be as a consultant if the faculty aren't at your college, or in a few rare cases as participants, or sometimes just under others. So, okay, so this at least gives you a few mistakes, and I'm sure none of you will make up from now on. So, okay, Elaine, back to you.
Elaine, make sure you take off your mute button.
Thank you. As you can see from this photo of the actual budget form, the Other Personnel section has several categories that are not likely to be applicable to NSF ATE grants, such as postdoctoral scholars. You may, however, have other personnel, other professionals right here, or perhaps secretarial clerical. Those are 2 categories that you might see on an ATE project. I've seen the other professionals category used for such things as lab assistants, webmaster, project coordinator. Occasionally you have secretarial clerical support, but only if the work is clearly supporting the work of the grant and is distinct from functions that are normally performed by the college and thus should be covered in the college's indirect costs. Be aware that students are typically paid hourly rates and time is capped at 20 hours a week during the academic year and 40 hours a week in the summer. The total amount to be paid, based on your hourly calculations that you'll include in your budget justification, will be inserted on this form if you happen to have undergraduate students that are actually going to be working on your project. For these other personnel, you will not be including bios for them. So consider the type of contract the person has with the college to determine the time. Again, you've got the calendar month, academic month, and summer month categories for these top two. This one's probably the only one that would be applicable. For these others at the bottom, if you should have some undergraduate students working or you have the secretarial clerical, you put the dollar amount here in the budget, but you will explain in your budget justification how much time they're actually going to be spending on the project. The next category we need to talk about is fringe benefits. On this slide, you have only one number to insert for the total fringe benefits on the salaries included in sections A and B, which are senior personnel and other personnel. The calculation of that number should be explained on the budget justification, stating the fringe benefit rate that was used. So as you prepare your budget, you will need to obtain an appropriate fringe benefit rate from your institution's Human Resources Department. Fringe benefit expense should be prorated based on the percent of the person's time being supported by the grant. On this slide, we point out all of the personnel who should be covered with fringe benefits. And you'll notice that all personnel except graduate students should be included in your fringe benefit calculation. Now we're going to turn it over to Mike and Liz and take some of your questions.
Thanks very much, Elaine. I have one question, and let's see, I'm not sure, it just came into the window. It says, do I have to pay for a faculty's release time in addition to paying for their salary? I think what the person means, you negotiate with your department that you want a 2-course release time for this person. Do you just simply pay the department, or do you pay extra to the faculty? How does that work? Who would like to try that, Liz? Or Liz, do you have a sense of that question?
Okay, I'll try it. I guess I don't quite understand there, but basically you would be just paying for that part of the person's salary, and you would, when it goes into a drawdown to NSF, you just request that amount. The institution would request that, and then that would free up other money for the institution to do something else. So NSF is actually picking up a portion of the salary that the college would normally be paying. A kind of exception to that would be in the summer, where maybe the person isn't normally teaching, and so then NSF provides money to the institution, who then pays the faculty member. Yes. I hope that's what you're asking. The only other exception would be if the faculty member isn't at your institution, and how are you paying them? And again, that would usually be as a consultant with some kind of an agreement. Right. Maybe Ellen or Elaine want to add a little something to that?
Liz, I think the college can also opt to use the money to pay the adjunct salary as opposed to taking the equivalent amount of the permanent faculty member's salary that's being released. What you have to be careful about is not doing both.
Yeah, and a lot of people, in fact, will put in when they're trying to get under the 200,000, they'll say, I'm releasing Joe for 20% of his time, and maybe 20% of his time is $6,000 that they're going to have a adjunct. They only have to pay $3,000 for. A lot of people have just put the $3,000 there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's good. You know, as long as you mentioned the 200,000, Liz, that brings us to a second question. One of the questions that came in is their budget came in over 200. What do? Do they whittle it down, or do they submit a $212,000 budget? You did have a chance to answer in the chat window. Do you want to elaborate a little bit?
Well, I did put that in. The 200,000, and again, the ATE program announcement's being rewritten right now, so be sure and read it. I always read anytime something's new. The 200,000 really was chosen because for 200,000 or less, as a new grantee, they have a different level of financial review by the Division of Grants and Agreements. And when it goes over 200,000, it automatically has like 2 levels of review. And for new grantees, this can be a bit cumbersome. So that's one of the reasons the 200,000 was put now. But you can always request more than $200,000, but you should then not be requesting as new to ATE, so you won't be put on the panel that reviews those type proposals. And if you put it in and go over 200,000, reviewers are probably going to be pretty negative because they really don't like to see people who don't read the solicitations and kind of follow the guidelines.
Well, there's some good advice. Stay under 200 and stay under the radar. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. I had a question for Elaine. Elaine, as we put in fringe benefits, how in the world do you know what fringe benefit costs are today? How does somebody find that out at their institution?
You'll have to go to your Human Resources Department and ask them what the fringe benefit rate is. Depending on the individuals, occasionally an institution will calculate it precisely for the individual that you are naming in your proposal. It doesn't have to be quite that precise, but you want to make sure that you've got enough money in the fringe benefit category to cover that, because you will be expected to cover the pro rata portion of fringe benefits that go with the pro rata portion of the faculty salary that's being requested from NSF. But you definitely have to work with your personnel department on it, and these rates change fairly regularly. So. And they're higher than you may think they are, so be sure you check on that.
These rates almost always seem to just go up, don't they? They don't ever seem to go down.
Could I say something? Often they're different for the academic year than they are for the summer too. So this can be a little bit tricky, but again, the business office should be able to give you this information.
That's a good response. Go right to your business office. You know, folks, we're perfectly on time for this part of our webinar. I think we're going to save the remaining questions we have and go to our next session, which is to Ellen. So Ellen, over to you.
Thank you, Mike. Continuing with direct costs on the budget, I'd like to cover item D, equipment. So if you look at the form, you'll see that this is the category. Let's see if I can pull this up. Right here, we'll give you a big shiny star, where you would list single items of equipment with an acquisition cost of $5,000 or more. So in addition to the price of the equipment, you would need to factor in the cost of any attachments or accessories needed to make that equipment usable for your project's purposes. So for example, if you're purchasing a piece of equipment that costs $4,000, but it also needs 2 attachments that cost $500 each to make it usable, that would bring the total acquisition cost for that piece of equipment to $5,000, and it would be budgeted in this category. So all equipment and instrumentation purchases for your project must be necessary to support your grant activities. They should not otherwise be available or accessible, and they should be purchased and acquired in accordance with your college's organizational practice. You should also note any equipment purchased with grant funds must have a service life of over 1 year. Do note, as Elaine said earlier, that how your college may classify certain budget expenses may be differently than NSF. So your college may classify equipment differently than NSF. They may consider laptop computers to be equipment. However, you need to go by NSF's definition of equipment when budgeting for your grant. And again, that's based on total acquisition cost. So if you're purchasing laptop computers for use in your project and they individually cost less than $5,000, even if the total of those units is more than $5,000, if you purchased 20 computers at $800 each and it was $16,000, that would not be budgeted in equipment. That would be budgeted in materials and supplies, and we'll go over that shortly. A quick take on what equipment is not. NSF funds can't be used to support costs that would normally be made if you didn't have a grant, such as general laboratory upgrades or routine teaching activities. And equipment should not include general utility items such as office equipment and office furniture. Most importantly, all equipment costs will need to be detailed in your budget justification, which includes addressing why you need this equipment and how it will be used. Moving into travel. So this travel line is to be used only to budget for travel costs for project staff or for college personnel that may not be project staff but are traveling to help accomplish project objectives, such as college faculty members that need to attend a professional development meeting to be able to test project-generated materials in their classes, as an example. So you would not budget for travel of national visiting committee members, advisors, speakers, or consultants under this category. Again, only project staff and college personnel traveling for the project. You may include only travel necessary to accomplish your project objectives. So funds can be requested for field work or attendance at meetings and conferences. And again, if they need to accomplish project objectives, or the travel needs to be for disseminating project results. When budgeting, most institutions have their own guidelines on mileage rates and per diem, and NSF accepts these, as the budgeted travel allowance should be consistent with the policies of your organization, so your college's travel policies. Do note some restrictions on travel. You must book the most economical form of travel, such as economy class airfare. First class airfare is unallowable. And you'll want to detail your travel expenses in the budget justification and include accurate estimates. For example, if you're budgeting to attend a conference, include the hotel rates or the projected hotel rates. Search airfares for the time frame you're traveling and include them. And be sure to budget for other incidentals such as meal and ground transportation. Note, if your project objectives require foreign travel, you must travel on U.S. carriers if they are available. And for the purposes of budgeting, if you'll note here, NSF has you parse out what is domestic versus foreign. If you are doing some foreign travel, travel to Canada, Mexico, and Puerto Rico for the purposes of budgeting are considered domestic travel. And very important, federal funds for alcohol and entertainment are completely unallowable, so that's not even something you want to think about. As an example of how this travel line can be used, this is where you would budget as new PIs to attend the National ATE Principal Investigators Conference, which is held each October in Washington, D.C. So it's a good idea to consider including funds for at least 2 team members to attend the annual ATE PI conference. So if you're applying for an ATE grant in October 2014 and it's funded, you would be expected to attend the 2015 ATE conference. So in doing that, note that ACC provides some assistance for the ATE conference. If you look at this little chart down here, ACC provides registration and lodging costs for 2 people for 2 nights per ATE project and center. As a project, you're actually allowed to bring up to 5 individuals, as a center up to 7 individuals, and again, ACC will support 2 individuals for registration and lodging. So you would be looking at budgeting expenses such as airfare, additional hotel nights if they're needed, or registration for additional team members beyond the 2 that AACC covers. We offer this as an example. I'm happy to answer questions about that offline or following the webinar, but just wanted to give you an example of how travel could be budgeted in this category for the ATE conference. Moving into participant support costs. So if your college is planning to host or offer conferences, meetings, training workshops, or other short-term instructional activities as part of your grant, the cost to support the participants, the attendees, or trainees of those events would be budgeted here. Participant support costs can be used for stipends, travel, and other related costs to support attendance at workshops or conferences. And it's important to distinguish between participants and project staff. Participants are not employees. They are individuals who are recipients of service or training provided by your college's NSF-funded event or your training activity. And while participants perform no direct work for your project, they're a vital part of your grant activities, and they can certainly be required to complete training activities, provide input, fill out a survey, any of those things to be eligible to receive the stipends or the travel support that you're offering them as participants. To go back to this slide, participant support is broken down into the following categories: stipends, travel, subsistence, and other. So in budgeting, please consider that all participant support costs must be reasonable and be limited to the days of attendance at the event, plus the actual travel time required to reach the event location by the most direct or economical route available. Participant support costs should also conform with the policy of the college in regard to the college's travel policies, and you'll need to provide detailed information, as with all of your budget numbers, in the budget justification. So under stipends, you would need to provide the stipend amount that each participant would receive and what expenses are figured into the provision of that stipend. Under travel, you'll need to explain the purpose of the travel and the time allotted for that travel. And again, I want to note that this travel line is separate from Section E that I covered previously. Travel in Section E is for project or college personnel, and again, the travel here in Section F is for participants or trainees. Under subsistence, you'll need to provide the amount allotted for subsistence, which can be a food per diem. And again, you'll need to specify the period for which you're offering this support. And you also need to consider if meals or lodging are furnished without charge or at a nominal cost to the participant, such as having those costs included in a registration fee, because then your per diem allowance would need to be correspondingly reduced. So as an example, if breakfast and lunch are included as part of your training activity, you cannot also then reimburse that participant for the costs of those meals. And as I mentioned previously, and again it can't be stressed enough, NSF funds cannot be used for the purchase of alcohol or for entertainment. And in other, this is a place where you could list other expenses associated for participants and how they're relevant and necessary to the project, such as printing of materials, purchasing flash drives with workshop materials on them, those types of items. And then I wanted to note a couple of considerations for budgeting for participant support. First of all, you will need to specify the number of participants to be engaged in or served by the project. So we go right back here, this number right here, this little area, number of participants. This cannot be a zero. Even if you are hosting a workshop that you've never hosted before and you don't know the number of attendees, you need to put in the projected number of attendees that you are hoping to serve by the project. And then lastly, this money cannot be transferred out of this budget category without NSF approval. So you really do need to be thoughtful about the money you put into participant support, because again, you cannot move it out without talking to NSF and getting their approval to do so. With that, I'd like to actually turn it over to Liz to go over some more program officer tips related to participant support.
Thanks, Ellen. This one's actually a little bit of a tricky category because some programs would tell you to put various things under participant support. So for example, if you were submitting something to the scholarship program, the scholarships for the students would be under the stipend amount. So again, read the program announcement there. But for ATE, it's primarily for people not at your institution. So high school teachers' stipends would go there if you are having a workshop to disseminate things and we're inviting 20 participants to come for a workshop for a week. That would be who it is. There are a few exceptions, so let me at least tell you a couple of exceptions there. For example, if you're supporting students to participate in a technical workshop or something like that, or so oftentimes students who aren't working on the project, I think the big thing, like Ellen said, these are for recipients of services. It doesn't mean that they're very important to it, but they're recipients of things that the project is serving more than the people who are actually working on the project itself. Can faculty at your institution be under participants if they are coming to a workshop? In general, the answer is they should be put under Section A. The exception might be is if none of them teach in the summer and you're bringing them back for a week before classes start, when they're not part of their regular time they would be teaching, they might sit under here too. Okay. The second thing, and Ellen stressed this, but let me stress it too, they have to add some value to the project. So just because they're recipients for a reason. You're trying to teach them some new skills. You're trying to get them to use some of your materials. You're trying to get them to test your materials that you're doing there. So if they are a participant, you should require something of them. So maybe they'll take it back and try out one of the units they develop at their institution and provide you feedback on it. So there are some, they clearly can be asked to do something. They're just not one of the main workers on the project, but they're also very important. So you should include stipends for high school teachers and students there. If you're bringing in faculty members from other institutions to attend a workshop and giving them a stipend, you should put it there. However, what we found a lot of times is that for college faculty who want to come to some of these, travel may be more important than paying them a stipend. So you think about whether you want to put it as a stipend or whether you want to put it on the travel line too. The food, here's the food. So the food has to, if you put food or subsistence there, it has to be one of two things. If they're coming in from a distance, okay, so they have your workshops in Washington, D.C., and they're coming from Ohio, so you're having to pay their travel as part of the travel there too. You can include normal subsistence for them. But if you serve food for anything, they have to be somehow associated with a program. So, so if you're bringing in these high school students and you're going to give them a pizza party after the event, be sure there's something happening at that pizza party besides just eating pizza. So maybe there's posters going on or something like that. Again, never any alcohol. You have to include the estimated number of participants there. We don't hold you to it. I guess I would say if you think they're going to be 30, then put in this is how many there are. If you end up serving 40 with that amount, that'd be fine. If it's 28, just if you put in 30, we wouldn't expect you to only have 5 there. And again, after the funding, if you want to move funds out of this, because you're asking this project to serve people, so if you want to take money after funding out of this, you have to get specific permission from NSF. But actually that brings a nice good thing about NSF proposals or grants is that they are grants, not contracts. So except for participant support, you have a lot of flexibility to move funds after funding, provided that's how you and your institution decide to best serve your project. So hope this answers a few questions. Ellen, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Liz. I just want to briefly run through the rest of other direct costs. And then I know we're coming up on a question break because I can see there are quite a few in the chat box. Other direct costs that are included in your proposal budget are materials and supplies, publication costs, consultant services, computer services, subcontracts, and other. And again, you'll need to identify and itemize all anticipated direct costs in your budget justification. So materials and supplies, I used this example previously, but this would include single items that cost $5,000 or less and that are project specific and demonstrated as necessary to run the project. So again, this category excludes equipment with a total acquisition cost of $5,000 or more. Materials and supplies, as I mentioned, need to be directly tied to the project, and they can include items such as plasticware, chemicals, and project-specific office supplies. For publication, documentation, and dissemination, funds may be requested in this category related to documenting, preparing, publishing, and sharing research findings or supporting materials coming out of your grant activities. And they generally include activities such as reports, reprints, editing, documentation, storage and indexing of data in databases, websites, page charges for publications and journals. As an example, as a new ATE PI, I mentioned the ATE conference that you're expected to attend and eventually you'd be expected to participate in a showcase session at the ATE conference where you would be sharing strategies and resources of your project. So funds in this category could potentially be used to develop an exhibit, poster, or other materials to disseminate information on your project outcomes. Consultant services. Under consultant services, you would budget for people that are working on the projects but they're not part of your project staff. So for those individuals that are paid a fee for service as external contractors. And note that you will need to identify and justify your need for consultants in the budget, as well as include anticipated costs and length of service that details how many days or hours the consultant will work and at what rate of pay. So NSF requires that this information be given on time and effort. So you can't just include a lump sum in your budget without explanation. So for example, if a consultant is going to cost $6,000, you need to then go on to define how, be it 10 days at $500 a day plus $1,000 for travel expenses, or 60 hours at $80 per hour plus $1,200 for travel expenses. But you'll need to include this level of detail. In addition, you can't budget to pay a consultant more than their reasonable or regular rate of pay. And a note that one place an external evaluator is often budgeted is as a consultant to the project. For some detailed information on suggestions for budgeting for evaluators and for evaluation, the Mentor Connect project recently held a webinar on right-sizing evaluation for small projects. In the handout to this webinar, we included links and a place you can go to access those materials. So I suggest you do that if you want more information on this, as it's a resource that's there for you, and I believe those links are also on the Mentor Connect website. Computer services. So the cost of computer services may be requested only if your existing institutional policy is to bill computer services as direct costs. And if that's so, then you'll need to include justification of your established computer service rates at your organization. So that will need to be included. Computer services can include things like computer-based searches for data and other information. Just to give you an example of what this category can mean, it doesn't generally include general purposes computer equipment such as word processing should not be requested. Subawards. New grantees are not likely to have subawards, but as some of you on the webinar may be applying for larger projects, that could include them. We'll spend a minute to go over this budget category. So subawards are used to fund a discrete portion of work that's carried out by another organization, and the subcontracting PI is responsible for the work proposed in the subaward. And the subawardee is responsible for management and oversight of the subaward budget. However, it is the prime institution, which is your college, that is ultimately responsible for all the project work, including the subaward. Subawards, as mentioned here, require separate budgets. So on the main budget form, you'll list the total annual subaward costs, but your budget justification will include details on the subaward, including a description of work to be performed and a description of the basis of selection for the subawardee. And again, the subawardees will be named on your budget. So as Elaine mentioned earlier, they need to be registered in Fastlane, and any senior personnel on that subaward need to be registered in Fastlane. So you'll be able to upload their budgets and get them appropriately named in your proposal. And other direct costs. Any other direct costs not previously identified must be included here, and again detailed and itemized in the budget justification. So any costs necessary to perform the project but not listed elsewhere go here. Examples include materials and supplies for work conducted in the office or the lab, meetings costs such as conference registration fees, potentially costs associated with preparing exhibits or presentation, or travel for advisors or national visiting committee members are examples of things that could be included in other direct costs. And now I'd like to turn it over to Mike to run this question poll for us, and Liz is going to go over the answer.
Thanks very much, Ellen. So here's the question, folks. Our evaluator, J.K. Smith, how should he be compensated? What should we do, folks? Choose A up there in the polling buttons as a consultant and a subaward? Both? Senior personnel? What do you think? So we talked about that a little bit so far. Give us your thoughts of where you're going to put your evaluator in this proposal. So we have a lot of answers coming in. I think they're headed in the right direction. Let's give them just another moment. I'm going to count down in a couple of seconds, and then we'll see the results of the poll. All right, so closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let me reposition this slightly. Excuse me, I have to get my repositioning button here. There we go. So as you see, Ellen, we chose, all of us chose really as a consultant. It makes most sense, but some of us thought it might be a subaward. What do we think? Liz, do you have a comment here that you'd like to make?
Well, actually, depending on the project, the answer is either A, B, or C. Okay. In general, it's going to be C because for various reasons. But most of you, especially for the small grants, are probably going to pay the person as a consultant. In other words, you're hiring these people as an individual or as a group, and in this case, you're going to have to know their daily rate, and you should add travel in there too. So I noticed somebody said they wanted to bring their consultant to the ATE conference. The ATE conference, the travel should just be included in what their consultant requests there from you. But there are cases where you want to do it as a subaward. So for example, if you were hiring, I'll take an example, an evaluation center at Iowa State, and the person who's going to be doing the evaluation wants that to be part of their duties there. They're expected to bring in a certain amount of money to the institution, then it would be done as a subaward. The disadvantage of that is it's probably going to cost you more because not only will they be paying their salary, you'll have to be paying the indirect that's normally associated with that institution. But the good news is you might be buying a lot from that institution. So maybe that evaluation center there provides some graduate students to your project who are helping to do this, who are helping to see what it is. They're bringing the resources of other people at the institution. So whereas most of you will be doing it as a consultant, there are cases where you want to do it as a subaward to an institution to bring in that whole evaluation center. The only time it would ever be senior personnel is if the XYZ university was going to be the grantee. And then it gets really tricky because how are you going to show that person is independent? But there are rare exceptions where D is the answer. J.K. Smith is shown up there as senior personnel, but if that's true, then he's usually or she's usually at a different college within the university or a different campus within your college who's doing the evaluation. And I can't think of really any case where it would be E. So again, most of you will do it as A. A few of you will do it as B, but most is as A in this case, I think. So I hope this answers or makes it a little bit clearer. But again, if you do it as a consultant, remember you have to put in some information about their time and effort, and grants and agreements is pretty strict about if you're doing that, and it has to be reasonable. So they can't be making lots more as a consultant than what their normal rate is at their institution.
Well, good. Thanks very much, Liz. Ellen, it's back to you. Am I correct?
Yes, and this is an easy one. So this is a sample form from Fastlane that will calculate your total direct costs. So if you've entered all your numbers correctly, the total direct cost for your grant will be calculated for you, and they'll be listed here. You just hit that calculate button. However, your budget is not yet complete, so you've done your direct costs, but now you need to calculate your indirect costs. And I'm going to turn it over to Elaine to talk to you about indirect costs.
Thanks, Ellen. Every institution receiving a grant award from the NSF must have and use a federally negotiated indirect cost rate in the proposal. This is an amount of money from the grant that helps support the business office and other functions of the college. Including indirect cost is mandatory. Again, for those of you with some NSF grant experience, this is a recent change tied to another rule that prohibits cost sharing on ATE and some other NSF grants. You need to know if your institution already has a rate established. Indirect cost rates change over time, so you need to make sure that the one that you're using in your proposal is the correct one and is current. If your institution does not have a rate, you will not be able to apply for one until your grant proposal has been recommended for funding. At that time, your college will be recommended to negotiate an indirect cost rate. If your institution does not have an indirect cost rate established, you will need to choose an approximated rate as a substitute until the rate for your college has been determined. Now, we have some news hot off the press, and I'm going to turn it over to Liz for just a minute to tell us a little bit about what she's learned just today, I believe, about what you should do for an indirect cost rate until you are in a position to have one negotiated for your institution.
Thanks, Elaine. I double-checked today because I've been seeing some information about a potential rule. And so the Division of Grants and Agreements talked to me today about this, and they said that the safe rate to use for NSF projects for institutions that don't have one is 10% of the direct cost minus participant support and equipment and any subawards. So I think a lot of you will find that that's a good answer, and at least in the first grant you won't ever be able to increase that amount, but once you get something established you can use the higher rate later. So I guess I would recommend, since they say this is a safe rate, that that's a pretty good number for you to put into your first proposal. There is 10% of direct cost minus the participant support, the subawards, and the equipment. So I hope this gives you a little bit of information. Since I knew I was doing this webinar, I wanted to double check with them today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Liz. That has been a frequent question from some of our new to ATE group, and I appreciate your digging a little deeper and getting us a good answer for that. One of the things that you will need to pay attention to, you notice that Liz said that you would want to exclude participant support, equipment, and subawards when you calculate what's called the base. You have to have a base, and you're going to submit that into the, you'll see here on the screen, you've got the base right here and the rate. So the base is the number that you're going to get when you look at your total grant, your total direct cost, and you subtract out those three categories. For the small grants, you're not likely to have any subawards to subtract, but if you've got any equipment cost or you've got any participant support, you need to subtract those numbers to get the base, and then that 10% or whatever your actual college indirect rate is will be applied to that base to get your total amount.
Elaine, may I say one more thing about indirects? If you've not had one, you have to be recommended for an award. So when the program officer calls you that you're going to be recommended, you can then have your business office start negotiating for that with Health and Human Services. But you have to be recommended first. So use that safe rate if you don't have one at the moment.
So thank you, Liz. So you want to be careful that you look at this indirect cost to add to your direct cost, because what you're going to be doing is adding the two together to get the total amount of your grant request. And that's the amount, that total amount, which is direct cost and indirect cost, is the amount that should not exceed the amount allowable for the category of project that you're applying for. So if it's a small grant, the two added together can exceed the $200,000 cumulative. And if it's a regular ATE project, it can exceed $900,000 and so forth. Based on the last solicitation, as Liz pointed out, we've got a new one expected this spring, and some of those numbers could change slightly. So let's just recap a minute here. You will need an indirect cost rate. You do not have the option of not having one and not using it. There was a time in the past when you could just waive your indirect costs, but you can't do that anymore. Either your institution already has one or you'll need to request one after you've been recommended for funding. Note that those categories that are not eligible for indirect costs, that's your equipment and your participant support and your subawards. Then this takes us to the total direct and indirect cost page. So you'll notice over here that that total, when you hit the calculate button, it's going to add up everything on that page and give you a total right here, which is the funds requested by the proposer. There is a budget category K, but that never applies in ATE work. So at least we've never found an example where that was applicable. So you can just skip category K. So that takes you to the last category, which is L, and that is the funds requested by proposer. So your category for J and for L will be the same number. And notice again that we've got the calculate and save. We're down at the bottom of the page now. So this is the magic place where you can save all your work and you can log out of the system and back in and it'll all still be there. So remember to hit the save button often. Now, all of this work, and like magic, you have a neatly formatted budget in the system. Each year will look like this, and then the cumulative budget will show all years and an overall total for your budget request. And you're finished, which is very exciting. Now, what we're going to do is go back to Mike and list and take some more of your questions, and then we'll delve into the subject of budget justifications. Mike?
Thanks, Elaine. In the interest of time, we're just going to take one question now, and Liz has had an opportunity to respond in quite detail in the chat window, so thanks, Liz, for doing that. Liz, I'm going to direct this one question to you. So you submit your proposal and you realize you made a mistake in the budget or something changed. Do you have any way of revising the budget after it's been submitted, or that's it, it's in and there's nothing you can do about it?
Well, this is one really good reason to submit early so that you can pull it back and think about it a little bit. But once the deadline's passed, you don't have any other options then. However, once you work with an NSF program director, okay, and NSF, the good news is you've been called and you have some changes, then you can submit different budget. The program director may ask you to submit a revised budget at that point in time. But if you just realize it 2 days after you submitted the proposal, in general, you're pretty well stuck with that. There may be rare exceptions, but my guess is most of the times the answer would be no from a program officer.
It's a good point about doing it early so that you can pull it back and adjust it. That's an interesting point.
I would recommend trying to, if you're a newbie and so that you can actually see what it looks like, set your deadline as 2 days before the deadline comes so that it gives you a little bit of chance to make sure that you've done everything, that you've remembered to register all those PIs and everything too. So.
Good advice. Elaine, I think you're going ahead on justification where our timing is good. We're just about 10 minutes left, so I think you're perfectly on time.
Okay, great. All right, so let's talk a little bit about budget justifications. As you can see, the budget form does not provide a way for you to provide much detail about why you are requesting funds. You will prepare a budget justification for this purpose. This is your chance to demonstrate that your budget is right for your project. It is important that reviewers conclude that you are not asking for too little or too much money to accomplish the work plan you've described in your proposal. The reason you are requesting funds for various purposes should be logical. You're allowed up to 3 pages for your budget justification. It's uploaded separately within the budget section and is not counted towards any of your page limits in preparing your proposal. Any other page limits, you do have a limit on how long your justification can be. There is no specific format required for a budget justification. In a minute, I'm going to review 2 styles that you might want to consider as budget justification formats. One is a narrative style and the other is a spreadsheet style. First, some general pointers. Think about the cost associated with everything you're planning. Carefully align activities with corresponding budget amounts that will make the work possible and be reasonable. No matter which format you choose for your budget justification, convert the justification document into a PDF document before uploading. Fastlane can do some funny things to special characters, and uploading PDF files eliminates this from happening. Even so, after uploading, always check to see if the document looks right and that you haven't exceeded the page limit. Don't put off developing the budget until the last minute. It takes time to research costs so that you can be very specific about the amounts of money that are needed and for what purpose. If someone asked you for money, what would you want to know? How much money? If the total is made up of several costs, such as travel, how much is being requested for each component part of the total? From whom do you need money? For whom do you need money? Personnel, participants, consultants? Who are these people? What will they do to contribute to the project? With what compensation? Over what period of time? What items do you plan to purchase and why? How will the items or equipment be used in a project activity to benefit students or participants? I'll tell you a real story. A friend of mine at another college asked if I would review a proposal for her last year, and I noticed that in the budget they had put a $40,000 for equipment, and not one place anywhere in the proposal had they discussed what they were going to use that particular equipment for. So that would be considered a fatal flaw. Be sure that if you've got it in the budget, you've explained it in the proposal and in the budget justification. That goes back to that codependence that I mentioned early on. Attention to detail is important to reviewers. They want to know that you have really thought through and calculated what resources will be needed for the project to be successful. Now let's look at some budget justifications. This first one is a narrative style. You'll notice that there's just a little introductory paragraph talking about how much this college wants to, is requesting, a total of $199,896, and how much for year one, how much for year two, and how much for year three. And then you'll notice, and this goes back to something I mentioned earlier, that each budget category that aligns with the NSF budget form is explained separately and clearly labeled. Senior personnel, who is this? What are they going to do? And how much are you going to pay them? Other personnel, who are they? What are they going to do? And how much are you going to pay them? And then again down here, Fringe Benefits. With the, and you notice here it's explained that the benefits for part-time instructors is 7.65% for this particular example. Now just a couple of other pages of the narrative. You'll notice the travel. They summarize the amounts for each year at the top, and then if you go down in here, all these details that shows you've really done your homework. Airfare, baggage fees, ground transportation, hotel, per diem, registration costs, whatever is going to be involved in those travel expenses has been carefully outlined. The person that sees this explanation is going to know that you've really given this some thought. Participant support, and Ellen went over that very clearly early on, the kind of detail you need to provide for that. And on as you go down. Notice you've got G of the direct cost, and then under that, notice we're following the NSF budget plan again. Item 1, materials and supplies, 2, publication costs, 3, consultant services. And if there's a category where you don't need any money, put it in and put none, so it keeps your numbering straight and makes your justification very clear and easy to follow. Now let's look at another style. This one particular one is a spreadsheet. I personally like this kind because I find it a really good project management tool once a project is funded. Follow the alphabet letter categories again, senior personnel, other personnel, all the same categories. And be careful that you include, if you'll notice, years 1 through 3, what your base salary is for determining what these salaries are. We've got a fringe benefit rate, a full-time rate of 28% here for the participants is outlined. You've got an equipment category, travel, and so forth. And you'll notice that by doing the spreadsheet, I've got each of the years and the total that I can put across there, year 1, year 2, year 3, and the total. So that helps me keep the numbers straight as I'm adding things up. It's very important to stay within your budget limits. So when you get to the end, you want to make sure that the total amount of their request, right over here, does not exceed what is allowable for your type of project that you're seeking funding for. Now we're going to let Liz share with you some of the common errors that she's encountered with budget justifications and proposals.
Thanks, Elaine. And I realized when I was looking at your thing, there was one thing I didn't include there. If you change your budget, be sure to go change your budget explanation, because nothing confuses reviewers more than seeing some numbers on the budget and some different numbers over on the budget justification. And reviewers spend a lot of time looking at the budget because they do want to be sure people are doing the right, are spending the money well. So the big thing is, it could be too short. I've seen budget explanations that were a half a page. Remember, you got 3 pages, and NSF kind of expects that's about how much you're going to need to use to explain it. If you use that spreadsheet format, you can include detail over there on the lines, just like Elaine was showing. Or if it's too long. And actually, anytime you go over length in things, NSF rules now say they can return things without review if you actually go over too long. So don't make that budget explanation too long. Don't make that proposal too long. It's not worth it, okay? It gets people upset with you. A lot of budget explanations are really hard to follow. So Elaine's were, both of those examples she gave were very clear. Partly is it showed the NSF categories A, B, C, whatever, and it's explained, and you can look at the budget explanation, go look at the budget, and make sure they're where it is, okay? So it needs to be clear and easy to follow, and the biggest thing is just to make sure that your budget explanation follows the same format as the budget itself. Time and rate are not given for consultants. I probably asked this question more than anything else. You've got $12,000 under there for consultants, and you don't tell us what you're expecting for that. So NSF expects you to tell us either days or hours. You know, 120 hours at so much an hour, and add the travel for consultants in that too. So just tell us what that is. The time for personnel isn't justified. Elaine spent a lot of time talking about this, and you should include that on the budget explanation, telling a little sentence or two about what those people are going to do. So if you're requesting a career coach and you're asking for 50% of the time, give us a little bit of information about what the career coach is doing. So, including overload pay for full-time faculty members, that's just a red flag everywhere. The only time, be real clear that you put it in, but talk with the program officer before you put it in, because it's only rare categories that is. But remember, you can compensate full-time faculty other ways. They can go to conferences. They can get special trainings they may not be able to get other ways. It's just that if you're going to be using your funds to pay full-time faculty, NSF wants to be sure that they're spending that much time on the project. Another is you say, oh, I've got $200,000. Whoops, I only added up to $160,000, so I'll just throw $40,000 into materials and supplies with no explanation what that is. It's okay to put in a budget for $193,000. So don't put anything in unless it's fully justified. And then if you're paying part-time faculty at your school, they're not consultants and they're not participants. They should be usually up in section A or B under some kind of other category. So again, part-time faculty are not consultants and they're not participants. They're part of who's at your institution, so would be covered under either section, probably section B, other is usually where they would be, but it could be other places. So, okay, Mike, back to you. Maybe we have time for a few more questions before things are over.
Yes, we do, and thank you very much, Liz. You know, folks, there's been a lot of interesting discussion in the chat window, and Liz has had an opportunity to make a detailed reply. You could review this by looking at the recording, but one of the participants suggested we might actually capture these questions and answers. We'll do that. We'll create a Word document of them so you'll have an opportunity to look at them again. You know, before we get into our wrap-up today, Liz, I think I'll stay with you on this question about equipment and $5,000. Is that a hard limit, or what if your institution calls equipment something over $2,500? Who rules here when we classify equipment?
Well, actually, in long run, your institution can call it anything they want at that point in time. It's just for the NSF budget line. In general, you put the equipment only for $5,000 or more up in that other grant. So again, you probably should put it under materials and supplies, realizing that these things for equipment may still have to go out under contracts or a bidding or however your institution does it. So we probably won't send it back if you put items under there. Historically, it was because you weren't allowed overhead on equipment, and your indirect cost rate might be the other way. But I would just stick with, for the NSF budget, only putting the $5,000 or more on the NSF budget on equipment line, and then the institution can classify it however they want to.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. We will do some follow-up questions, but let's take care of some business here. Elaine, I'd like to go back to you to talk about the next webinar in this series, and then we're going to ask people to hang on for just another minute and help us with a survey. So Elaine, tell us about this event in September.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Liz, and thanks, Mike. The Mentor Connect team hopes that you found this webinar helpful. Beginning next week, you will be able to access the recorded webinar, PowerPoint, and handout from the webinar. You may revisit this information at any time. We also encourage you to share the link with others that you think can benefit from this webinar. For those of you who would like to find out more about the ATE program and the opportunity to receive special mentoring and technical assistance for proposal development from Mentor Connect, I encourage you to participate in the September 10th, 2014 webinar. Again, the webinar is free, but you need to register to participate. The September Mentor Connect webinar will feature Dr. Celeste Carter, co-lead and program officer for the ATE program. The application for the Mentor Connect mentoring program will be available at the conclusion of the September 10th webinar, and we will be accepting 20 new colleges in the next cohort for our services. Again, feel free to share this webinar information with anyone who may benefit. And I'll turn it back to you, Mike, for help with our evaluation survey.
Thanks very much, Elaine. So here we go, folks. I'm going to launch this survey. I'm going to ask you to help us pay the bills. I'm just saying that, you know, a joke, but this allows us to demonstrate to the National Science Foundation that we're able to gauge some of the impact of these webinars, and it also asks for your input and suggestions for the future. So presenters, please don't change your screen as we go through these final questions here. One question that we did have, it's a detailed one, but I think it's important. For example, one of the participants asked, is there a way to include rigging costs? I see, Liz, that you've just answered that one. Where do you think those should be to the cost of the equipment itself as opposed to somewhere specific? Is that right, Liz?
That's actually a total cost of the equipment, because if you just bought the equipment and it's not usable, it's not of much value to it. So just NSF won't usually pay for anything like putting it in desk in the room or to put the computers on or things like that. But if you're buying an expensive piece of equipment that needs some special installation to put it in the room, then you should include that as part of the equipment cost.
That makes sense. I'm going to turn this question now to Ellen. Ellen, one of the participants said, how can I possibly know the cost of all these things? I mean, it seems burdensome, but I think in some way, for example, if you're going to put down an airfare, you should probably look up the current airfares. You should work on your budget at that level of detail. Do you agree, or do you think there's room for a lot of estimating here? What would you advise when you're trying to get the costs here?
When you're trying to get the cost, you're going to want to estimate as closely as possible. So yes, if you know you're going to be traveling 6 months from now potentially on an airline, look up those costs. Of course, NSF is going to understand that there may be some inflation or some variation if you are projecting travel costs into the future of your grant. But as close as you can get to an approximation is only going to help. So look up current hotel rates, look up airfares. Contact conferences and see what registrations are going to be. So this is close to a level of detail, accurate detail that you can get is helpful.
Good. Thank you, Ellen. And the last question is going to be for Elaine, and then we'll wrap up today. By the way, folks, I'm just going to keep the survey up for another 60 seconds, so click your buttons and type in your answers. Elaine, you mentioned this to start early in preparing your budget. I mean, can you realistically start early if you don't even know exactly what your proposal is going to be? Let me put it another way. How much time should you set aside to do all of this budget stuff?
Well, you'll need several days and do it over time. The first step in doing your budget is making sure you have everybody registered so that you can pull them in. And go ahead and put some stand-in numbers in certain places and then go back and refine them later. But as Liz pointed out, make sure that you go back and double check and triple check for that codependency that I talked about so that your budget numbers in the budget form match your budget justification, match what's in your proposal. There's a lot of rewriting that goes on during that process, but you do need to go ahead and start early.
Well, good, Elaine. Thank you. Friends, I'm going to close the survey now. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. And this officially concludes our webinar today. I want to personally thank our presenters, Elaine Kraft and Ellen House and Liz Tillis. Thank you all very much for your insight today. I think one thing I got out of this presentation was the level of detail. You just need to commit to that level of detail for this budget. We really do appreciate the insight from all of you. So everyone, thank you very much for participating. This officially ends our webinar. Goodbye.